Hey everyone, welcome back to Taking Back Monday. I am so excited you decided to say goodbye to the Sunday scaries and hello to more meaningful work. And we are back today with another one of our Taking Back Monday shorts. And as you know, if you've heard these before, these are based on articles that I write on LinkedIn. And if you haven't connected with me yet, head on over to LinkedIn and send me a connection request. And one of those things that we're doing with these shorts is really demonstrating the power of AI and how we can use that to take back our Monday. So all of these shorts open with a real intro from me. I'm a real person speaking real words. But the actual content of the podcast is going to be conducted by two AI voices. And what's really cool is using this technology and showing how we can take back work and make it into the future. So with that, enjoy this Taking Back Monday short.
Okay, so get this right. I saw this quote online the other day, and it just stuck with me. It said, "To share your weakness is to make yourself vulnerable. To make yourself vulnerable is to show your strength." And it really got me thinking about today's, deep dive.
Yeah.
Because it's like, on the surface, vulnerability and strength seem like total opposites.
Right.
Like, how can being vulnerable, which feels kind of scary, actually be a source of strength?
Totally.
And that's exactly what we're going to unpack today. We've got some really interesting stuff to dig into. We're talking about Brené Brown's work, a blog post by Kent Sanders, and this really thought-provoking piece by Alyssa.
Oh, cool.
You ready to dive in?
Let's do it. Vulnerability. It's everywhere you turn these days right now. Everyone's talking about it, but it's also one of those things that's surprisingly hard to actually pin down.
It's kind of slippery.
Yeah. Like, what does it actually mean to be vulnerable, and why is it so important? Especially, in the context of like sharing our work and putting ourselves out there.
100%.
And I think that's where Brené Brown's research is so helpful. Like, she gives us this really insightful framework for understanding it all.
Yeah, she does. And the Very Well Mind article we've got, it does such a good job of like really highlighting the nuance in her work.
Right. It's not just about, spilling your guts to anyone who will listen.
Yeah,
right.
Exactly.
It's about being really intentional and discerning about what we share and with whom.
Yeah.
It's about showing up as our authentic selves, even when, and maybe especially when, we're uncertain about the outcome.
Yeah. 100%. And that actually makes me think about the piece by Kent Sanders that we're going to get into.
Oh, yeah.
He's talking specifically about sharing your art.
Yeah.
But it's really about putting your authentic self out there.
Exactly. And what's so interesting is that Brown actually discovered this whole idea of vulnerability being strength through her research, even though she initially resisted it.
Wait, really?
Yeah.
I didn't know that about her.
Oh, yeah. She talks about how, at first, she was kind of put off by this finding.
Right.
It wasn't what she was expecting, and it kind of challenged her own assumptions.
Which almost makes it more impactful in a way, right?
Yeah, I think so too.
Because it wasn't just like, oh, this feels good to say. It was like, no, this is what the data's telling me, even if it makes me uncomfortable.
Right, exactly. And she actually uses this really vivid phrase. She talks about feeling hijacked by her own data.
Hijacked by her own data? I love that. Because it speaks to how deeply ingrained our fear of vulnerability can be.
Absolutely. It's like on some level, we all know that being vulnerable is important, but that fear, that resistance, it can be so strong.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's the other part of the quote. Like, after she talks about being hijacked, she talks about being rescued by that same data.
What do you make of that?
I mean, for me, it really highlights the transformative power of embracing vulnerability. Like, it's not always easy, it's not always comfortable, but it can lead us to a more authentic and ultimately more fulfilling life, both personally and creatively.
Okay, so that sounds great in theory. But what does that actually look like? Because it's one thing to say vulnerability is good, but it's another thing to actually be vulnerable,
Absolutely.
Especially when it comes to something you've poured your heart into, like your creative work.
Yeah.
It's scary to put yourself out there.
It is, yeah.
It's like, how do you actually bridge that gap between knowing vulnerability is important and actually doing it?
Yeah.
Especially when it comes to something you've poured your heart into, like your creative work.
Yeah.
It's scary to put yourself out there.
It is, yeah.
It's like, how do you actually bridge that gap between knowing vulnerability is important and actually doing it?
That's where I think Kent Sanders' piece really shines. He dives headfirst into that fear of sharing your art. And what I find so refreshing is that he doesn't shy away from the risks involved.
It's true. He doesn't sugarcoat it. But then he flips the script and says, yeah, it's risky, but it's so worth it. And he lays out some really compelling reasons why.
And he connects it to leadership, which I wasn't expecting. His argument is that when you share your work, you're not just putting something out there, you're actually inspiring other people to do the same. It's a form of generosity and, dare I say, courage.
Okay, so walk me through his 4 big reasons why sharing is so crucial. Because I'll admit, I still have those moments where I'm like, maybe I'll just keep this one to myself.
Oh, absolutely. We all do.
Yeah.
His first point really resonated with me, and it ties back to what we were saying about Brown. He says, create off passion, not fear. It's about letting go of that inner critic and allowing yourself to create from a place of authenticity, even if it's messy or imperfect.
Okay, that makes sense. If you're constantly worried about judgment, you're probably not going to create your best work anyway.
Exactly. And it's not just about the quality of the work itself. It's about the energy we bring to the creative process. When we create from a place of passion, it shines through.
So that's point 1. What about his second reason?
This is where it gets really interesting. He argues that sharing your art allows you to influence others in a way that simply creating in isolation doesn't. He gives the example of a song or an ebook, something you create that has the potential to reach a wide audience and inspire them in some way.
So it's like that ripple effect we were talking about earlier. You never know who might be watching, listening, or reading, and how your work might impact them.
Precisely. He then goes on to say that sharing your art can actually give other people courage. When we see someone else being brave enough to put themselves out there, it gives us permission to do the same. It's like that saying, be the change you want to see in the world.
Okay, that's powerful. But what about the flip side? What about when people don't respond the way you hoped? Or they have constructive criticism, which, let's face it, can be tough to swallow sometimes.
That's where his fourth and final point comes in, learning and growing. Sanders is a big proponent of feedback, even if it's not always what you want to hear.
Okay, but how do you actually get good feedback, though? Feels like everyone's a critic these days, and not all feedback is created equal.
He actually dives into that a bit. It's about seeking out feedback from people who understand your work and want to see you succeed. It's not about pleasing everyone. It's about finding your people, those who get it, who resonate with what you're doing, and who can offer insights that help you refine your craft.
So it's like building a community around your work, people you trust, to give you honest and helpful feedback, even if it's not always easy to hear.
Exactly. And that feedback loop, as tough as it can be, is often where the real growth happens.
It's almost like feedback becomes this gift, even when it's wrapped in sandpaper a little bit. It helps you see your work with fresh eyes and pushes you to grow. Speaking of which, that reminds me of Alyssa's article and that great anecdote she shared about the Gossip Girl episode. You know the one I'm talking about.
Oh, totally. I have to admit, when I first saw that in there, I was like, Gossip Girl? Okay, interesting choice. Their point about finding, those universal truths in unexpected places, that really landed for me.
It's so true.
It really is. It's like those little nuggets of wisdom, they can pop up anywhere if you're just open to seeing them,
And she uses that episode to illustrate such a powerful point that it just takes one person to connect with your art. But you can't connect with that person unless you show up.
Oh, that quote.
Right.
It's so simple, but it's like, it just hits you right between the eyes, It's like there's so much pressure these days to be successful, right?
Yeah.
To reach millions, have your work go viral.
Totally.
But Alyssa just cuts through all of that noise and reminds us that real connection, real impact, it often starts with just one person.
One person who gets it, who sees the world the way you do, who resonates with your unique voice. It's like that feeling of finally someone understands.
Yes, exactly. And the second part of that quote, it's crucial too, but you can't connect with that person unless you show up. Like, that's it right there.
It's a call to action.
Yes, 100%. It's about taking that leap of faith, putting yourself out there, even if it feels terrifying.
Totally. And her story about launching her podcast is such a perfect example of that, right?
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, she really put it all out there, like her fears, her doubts, her hopes for the podcast. It felt very real, very relatable,
Absolutely. And didn't it kind of make you want to root for her even more? It's like, by being so open about her own vulnerability, she created the space for her listeners to connect with her on a deeper level.
Yeah. And then her community really showed up, which I think speaks to the power of what we've been talking about this whole time, right?
It's the perfect embodiment of both Brown's work on the importance of vulnerability, Andy Sanders' point about, that ripple effect that sharing your work can have.
Yeah.
You just never know who you might inspire.
So, As we wrap up our deep dive today, what's the one thing you hope listeners will walk away with?
Ooh, that's a good one. We've covered a lot today, but, if I had to distill it down to one question, it would be this. If you knew that it just takes one person to make a difference, what would you be more willing to share with the world? It's something I've been asking myself all week. How about you?
Oh, same here. Big questions to sit with. And you know what? I have a feeling our listeners are asking themselves that same question right now. Thanks for diving into this with me today.
It's been great.